Thank you, Elena. Usually people ask me not to be provocateur because this is my role in life. Well, I don't know. You will see whether I am or not. So I don't have much time. I will deliver more telegraphical messages. Hopefully, in the Q&A, may develop some more deeply some aspect. 3 years ago, College of Islamic Studies in Qatar, funded by Tariq Ramadan and others, they have a call for a paper about migration studies and Islamic ethics. And they ask me, they send me the call, and they invite me somehow. So I told them I would accept the invitation if I undo their call for contributions. And they are, I argue, sufficiently liberal that they accept that. And so I did a paper where I analyzed 85 articles in English, French, and Arabic about migration studies. Okay, so it was randomly selected the last year, so we took the recent one. And what I found that, in fact, it's really, there is this scholarly community, they negotiate what Weber called ethics of conviction and ethics of responsibility. Okay, so just for those who are not familiar with this, it's simply ethics of conviction, where the maximization of principal values, usually with a hierarchy between these values, without regard the cost or the consequences of principled action. Okay, so ethics of responsibility, in the contrary, actually they look to these values, and they think that they enter into conflict at certain time. I mean, how would we deal with the national labor market and open our doors to migrants? So this is where the ethics of responsibility, optimizing the principle and the consequences of action. So I do thus argue that there is an epistemic community that negotiate with and constantly combine both ethics. And more details, if I can say, that we have really since 90s a qualitative and a quantitative leap in studies concerning immigrant religion, because I'm talking about normativity. I didn't tell you that I look only about normativity. I mean, not about the validity, and just where people were normative, they brought something, a judgment in the end. We see that they push forward, they advocate directly or indirectly about something. So, so acknowledging their colonial past of migrant, their religious diversity. Somehow I would say they are liberal, clearly, in a sense that you see, I don't have time, but multicultural, and what I would say they embody the new enlightenment as not as a political project, but as a way of life, that problem solving with ethical orientations and things like that. So actually, my conclusion was to the conference, to the workshop in Qatar, that in fact you need instead of doing a call for paper where you create a dichotomy between positivists and those who and the humanists who may follow Islamic ethics, that you need to ally maybe with this positivist, because their ethics is very close to what would be an Islamic ethics. So maybe you need to join the front against the others. I mean, I will talk about the others in a few seconds. So this is, if you like, this quickly. I move to say, yet who tell the stories? Okay, is it the scholarly community? I mean, in my book last 2 years ago, Knowledge Production in the Arab World, The Impossible Promise, I have a chapter also who cite whom on Arab uprising. So we look to around 520 articles, and we know that those who influence the intifadas in the Arab world, they are not the scholarly community. Somebody like Fawaz Trabulsi, very influential Lebanese scholar who wrote exclusively in the newspapers, was so influential but was not cited. So I would say more and more knowledge producers should we think about media and think tanks, and sometimes there is a junction with the scholarly community, and sometimes there is not. And all what I argue in my work on the Arab world, that knowledge often produced but not used, okay? And this is why I create a portal called Athar Portal for Social Impact of Scientific Research, try to bridge between society and between public awareness, policymaker, and etc. So there is a real issue. I don't think only in the Arab world, but this is something very important. So always we should ask the question about knowledge for whom, knowledge for what, in order to address some problem. The problem is the following, that in fact, if you take the migration studies, and as you notice, I conflate refugee-ness with migration for reason I don't have time to develop, but more and more, I mean, it's very difficult to disentangle these two categories. So as Homi Bhabha yesterday said, yeah, there is problem with the discourse of crisis. And just to give you one example, that in fact, until today, the analysis of the media in Europe keep talking about refugee crisis, although you have last year 89% reduction on the entry to Europe than 2015. 2015, indeed it was a thrust, a crisis, if you like, but not. But we keep talking about crisis. So yes, you have heavy instrumentalization of migration by populist parties and media. So they are so influential. The regime plays successfully to people's needs, establishing fake fact and truth, endangering democracy. I love the work of Hannah Arendt. And I will quote her, the ideal subject of totalitarian rules is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, i.e. reality of experience, and the distinction between truth and false, the standard of truth, of thought, sorry, no longer exist. And really, this is wrote in the time of Nazi, but I would say it's very true nowadays. So I think we are in a post-truth situation in spite of the eruption of our scholarly work. And I like a lot the work of Robert Proctor about agnotology, when ignorance is socially constructed and politically imposed. So it's building on concepts such as structural amnesia, non-thinking, state of denial. Agnotology refers to a social theory of ignorance that supposes that ignorance is pervasive and can be politically advantageous. So ignorance thus is not a simple omission or a gap, but something that is made, maintained, and manipulated. Just let me give you an example. You have a census about Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, where the census, this is last year, 172,000 Palestinians in Lebanon. And yet, somebody like Gibran Bassil keep until 1 month ago talking about 500,000 of Palestinians in Lebanon. Just to so this is what was terrible. And part, I would say, sometimes of this agnotology is when you don't like something, you keep asking for more empirical rigor. So you gain time by asking more study, and this is what I calculated. $20 million of studies for Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and absolutely there is no change of the fundamental basic rights like right to own a property or right to work. So this, what I call empirical rigor, is very selective, and we find it a lot on the question of Syrian uprising and how they kept saying, no, I mean, still we are not sure there is chemical weapon, etc., where it's something very obvious. So let me talk about the 4 blind spots, and start by a positive one. Positive things that I ask knowledge producers, whether scholarly community of media, to acknowledge this is a space, the sea, as a new geopolitical space of solidarity. This is amazing, where we see more and more the shore constitute a space of contestation between encroachment of sovereignty and expansions of solidarity. My friend Nicola Kosmatopoulos, an anthropologist, wrote that borders are not anymore separating 2 sovereign states, but a salient gap in terraqueous sovereignties in which solidarities group and politics have occupied. I am thinking, of course, you see Carol, the famous rescuer, German rescuer, who was arrested in Italy, but also I'm thinking about Gaza, Freedom Fotella, the Greek one, and the Turkish one, Mavi Marmara. So if you like, I invite us to think the sea as a maybe a place of disruption, if you like, where authoritarianism, populism are so occupying the terrestrial, the land. I mean, to think about the sea as a space of freedom. The second spot, I think, and I'm so glad yesterday with the talk about the religion and migration, that I think here, when I said that, generally speaking, I'm really happy about normative engagement of migrant scholar. I think this is in a broad sense, but if I zoom in, I'm still thinking that the secularization theory still affecting the mind of many of scholars. And of course, by saying this is not to say that I'm against the secularism, but I'm calling for post-secular society, where we rethink our secularity, where we accept that there is a multiple secularities, and each country should construct its own secularities, and the secularities as a separation between state and religion is very important, but not necessarily as a religion and politics, because in religion there is ethics. And do we want a world without ethics? And ethics, we like it, we don't like stem part of it from the religion. So I think here where there is still we don't think seriously the role of religion in especially when we think about integration of migrant and refugees. And not only my big discovery last few months is your project, Elena, and your team, but also a book, a German book, Xenosophia and Religion, is about the culture of welcoming in Germany. And they argue that why we don't talk about culture of welcoming. And I found it very interesting. So we keep talking about xenophobia. Why not xenosophia? I mean, loving the stranger. And they have evidence. They are very empirical books. I mean, they mobilize all the public opinions from 2011 until 2016, showing that, in fact, they have evidence, for instance, that when the religiosity is high, the culture of welcoming is high. And when it is in the middle, it's problematic. They show how religion is one of the factors that is at play. And myself, I work on Syrian refugees in Europe, and how I notice how cognitive transformation of migrant worldview. So again, what I'm arguing that we should take seriously the question of religion, and to understand how religion is enabler or impediment of integration. So in a nutshell, you have this amazing symbolic message from the Pope kissing the feet of migrants from Africa, from Syria, but also, of course, you have a surge of Islamophobia, and which is not necessarily related to religiosity of the others, of the host countries, but I mean, it's a very complex phenomena. But I think this is where example where knowledge producer, the media, are missing so much in terms of understanding religiosity of the migrant. I mean, a survey in 2016 showing 82% of Muslims in Europe are non-practicing. And of course, the major talk will be about the burqa, about the veil, and things like that. And of course, all the implication when we legalize the debate. I mean, when we ban the veil, so we don't anymore create a debate between two equal people, but between a legal one and illegal one. So the whole, and how media push for the legalism. The third blind spot, I would say, is working the universalism. Let me put it clearly, I don't believe there is a universal discipline. So I don't talk about universal sociology, okay? But I talk about universal concepts. And for me, it's the question, when we think about the migrant integration, we cannot think this without working what kind of multiculturalism and universalism we want. And I think I would like to see in knowledge production more taking into account the three conditions of constructing the universalism. The first is an outcome of a quasi-cross-cultural consensus. For instance, it means that it's not a Euro-American because a concept emerged here that become universal. So I think, when I teach at American University of Beirut, I spend 3 weeks to show the debate on Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think Universal Declaration of Human Rights is an example of something cross-cultural consensus, because the debate that you have in a multi part of the world is very important. The second is not a concept like social class, like democracy, like gender equality, etc. Not a teleological concept, but a historical experience that gets its normativity as a result of a collective historical learning process, inherently open-ended. It means that democracy, it's universal, is not because French Revolution invented, but because we see it's a process, it's a trajectory, how spread in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, in Arab world, and so on. And the third condition is universality, universality as an imaginary and not as a model to be exported. So if democracy is a universal, but universal as imaginary and not as a model to replicate it. I don't want American to write the constitution for Iraqis, neither the Russian for Syrians. So this is something Syrian and Iraqi should do it. So I think the whole issue, how if I can take many, I don't have time, but gender equality, how you will forge the gender equality, and in the same time thinking how to apply it to Muslim community in UK. How would you deal with the Sharia court, which is extremely important for conflict resolutions, but also violating some of universal concepts? So how would you deal with this? And here where all my work on post-secular society, where I ask the state to manage the diversity and multiculturalism. Just to give you an example from France, because I'm following France. It was a big story of blasphemy, of course, after Charlie Hebdo and Je suis Charlie. So I ask the question whether the blasphemy is a right in France. Is it a universal value to court? Actually, for me, it's a universal value. But should we see whether it entails incitement against minority that has its fragile status as a citizen and a migrant? Blasphemy, is it now hailed out just as a right, but a kind of duty? You know why I wrote this? Because I saw a debate in a French TV where Jamal Debbouze, a famous comedian, Algerian, the presenter asked him, "Can you do blasphemy?" Say, "Yeah, I can do it." Say, do it. And you have the public say, do it. And they say, he insulted God, and they applaud it. So it's become, wow, this is the threshold of access to civilization. He is now a civilized. So this is, I like a lot Emmanuel Todd, his book, Who is Charlie, who wrote, yes, there is a right to blaspheme, but one must also have the right to say that blasphemy is not a priority and that it's idiot. I was demanding the right to counter blasphemy, to say that the caricature of Muhammad were obscene, rubbish, totally historically out of synchron, and the expression of rampant Islamophobia. And for saying that, he was accused, of course, of complicity with a terrorist. So my last point, my last blind spot, I think I work a lot on functions of knowledge production. Yes, our duty to if you like, not to be partisan, but we have normativity. And our duty to push for dialogue. And I'm so glad that Homi Bhabha yesterday cite Levinas, and I will continue in this direction. Dialogue which is based on ethics rather than legalism. This is what I call our duty as a community to push for that. Levinas, the priority of otherness, and on the concept of responsibility as the pre-thematic structure of the self, and as a transcendence. Responsibility is the effective, immediate experience of transcendence and fraternity. We should, as such, enter a dialogue while stripping ourselves as much as we can from pre-constructed ideas and prejudices about the others. This will develop the human relationship with migrant, or what Levinas' famous sentence, avant cogito, il y a un bonjour. Before cogito, there is good morning. This is different from of cogito of Western philosophy, and toward more complexity. Being myself, I already ask myself whether my being is justified, whether the da of my Dasein is not already the usurpation of someone place. This dialogue is a way to escape many specters that haunt the migrant debate of security and criminalization. And I will finish again by Hannah Arendt say, this is what Levinas invite us to acknowledge the face. Here where Hannah Arendt distinguish between politics of pity, where there is you help migrant through money in remote mode, or politics of compassion, where we have a contact, face-to-face contact. And I think this is where Levinas become so important for a project of hospitality like your project. Thank you so much.